And what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. As we head into the 30th MLS season, it's time we take a look at the state of MLS. And to do that, we have brought on a very special guest, Mike, who runs the account MLS Box2Box. Happy to have you on board. How are you doing?
Good, man. Thanks for having me, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention, but do you have a scarf you want to show off for scarf of the week?
Yeah, I brought one. I'm not
Awesome.
a scarf guy, and I am not allowed to decorate in the house, but I picked this one up at the 2002 World Cup,
Oh,
and
nice.
so that was probably still my favorite team that I went with at that time. 20 something
Yeah.
years ago. Great time being in Tokyo and spent some time in Seoul too during that one. And yeah, I was still skinny enough to be able to comfortably sleep in a Japanese hotel at that time. But yeah, it brings back good memories when I see this one.
Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, we're all about the scarves that have connections to it. I pick up one on every away trip that I go on, and then order stuff from interviews and stuff like that. So, but today we're talking MLS, we're talking the American League, and we also just watched the USMNT play their first game of 2025. So I've got the US scarf
Nice.
and from the Copa America Centenario.
Nice.
Yeah, so picked this one up right at the end. It was on sale. I was like, oh yeah, I like a scarf. And then now I'm 80 scarves deep on my collection. So this is one of the first. So I'm excited for that.
Very cool. Very cool.
All right. So today we're going to chat about the state of MLS, like we mentioned. So mainly how the current state of the league, as it pertains to roster rules and salary caps and expansions and all these different things, how that impacts the league, where it can grow, and realistically, if we can get to these idealistic levels that people keep talking about. I just we could just jump right into it at this point. In your Blue Sky account, you claim to be the, and I quote, I took this as a quote, the type of sicko who can actually explain the MLS budget and roster rules, which is the type of sicko we just love on this show, because that is just right up our alley. There were also a ton of roster rules that were
Yeah.
just changed within the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. Yeah, 4 days with, cash for players trade, shifted windows, all this sort of stuff. So we're going to try and cover as much of that as we can today. But I think it'd be silly not to start with the biggest one, something people have been talking about for a long time, and that's the cash for players system. Your thoughts on it, good, bad, ugly? Give me the rundown of what you're thinking right now.
Yeah, definitely the longest term, the one that's going to have the greatest impact on the league, in my opinion, out of the ones that just came through. So big change, in my opinion. I think it's something that's good for the league. Something you have to be a little bit careful with, but overall, it's going to keep more good players within the league. We're seeing that right now. The rumors surrounding Lucho Acosta, as well as Evander. Apparently, Dallas just put a $12 million bid in for Evander. So him staying in the league is a lot better than him going to somewhere in Brazil, Argentina, potentially a lower league back in Europe. So that's
Mhm.
good news. Obviously, I think you want to kind of protect a little bit against becoming something akin to Liga MX, where they just probably inflate the prices of guys that are already in the league. You want to continue to bring in new players to the league, especially as we're growing, bringing in the 30th team this year. You don't want to dilute the talent, and you also, want to maintain some level of parity. But as you look at, long term, how players are valued within the league, I think there's probably a little undervaluation on a number of guys within the league, just because there's no real way for them to be moved within the league for really accurate market value. And this isn't going to solve all that. It's kind of a two in, two out system. So you can at most bring in two players for cash, sell two players for cash. And then the normal, roster rules around DPs, U22s are going to protect against, really that market exploding and going crazy. But overall, I think it's a huge move. It's long overdue. I think I read that they've been working on this for 6 years, which is just like MLS. But all in all, yeah, I'm really excited about this one.
But yeah, so we had talked about that a little bit on the DMs that we had, where that was always the biggest fear was having this system, and we saw what it did with League MX, guys that you could move on and show that you are a league that will progress and move talent on. Instead, you end up taking players who aren't really worth the money that you are spending for them, throwing them up, doubling their value, and then ending up stagnating your development pipeline. And I think that's a huge, huge fear. I don't think it's something that people are like who are coming up with like negatives against this are wrong about. But I do definitely agree that it's something that we've needed because for too long we've let players leave the league in general for way less than what we probably could have kept them in the league for. And it has, I don't know if I want to say it's hurt our growth necessarily, but it definitely hasn't helped it, right? If we were able to keep guys, one of the guys that pops into my mind is Lucas Zelarayan, right? Had to move him on in Columbus to get Diego Rossi in to get the 3DP rule. Yes, he went out for a lot of money to Middle Eastern club. I believe it was Saudi Arabia, if I remember correctly. Could somebody have picked him up and kept him in the league and kept his level in the league and made that a benchmark instead of letting him leave and trying to restart from there? That was always something that was in my mind when something like this came up. Could we take those sorts of players and keep them around? Not necessarily the TAM level players and then raise them up and put $2 extra million on their valuation and then hurt it that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think, one of the nice things too is this can help, I think, with younger players as well, moving them on, moving them into U22. We're kind of seeing that with what Montreal does. Obviously, they've made a number of moves to move guys, younger guys throughout the league, maybe aren't getting the playing time they'd like, moving them into a U22 spot, so giving them a raise. Now they can go out and actually spend cash on that. Will a club like Montreal? Kind of doubt it. I kind of still think they're going to go with the GAN trades. But this allows them to do that. But yeah, 100% right. I mean, perfect example of a League MX transaction I think you want to guard against is, Jesus Orozco moving from Chivas to Cruz Azul for $12 million. Good player, 22-year-old center back, you know, really good at breaking lines. Is he worth $12 million at 22? Probably not. And if you pay $12 million for him, the odds of him ever going to Europe are probably pretty slim. And I don't think you want to be, kind of blocking guys into MLS, even if you're going to give them, $12 million transfer fee and 3 million. You still want to give them that opportunity to progress to Europe. But again, some of the natural rules that are still in place in MLS, I think will prevent some of that from happening. So you prefer it to be guys like we're talking about, Evander, maybe even Chicho Arango when he left and came back, stuff like that to keep those types of players where it's maybe not the perfect fit as a DP in their system, but they're either a DP for somebody else or they're a better fit in a different system. So yeah, I think it's an exciting move for sure.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example, right? I think one of the reasons we're able to attract so much talent from South America and younger guys from Europe is because we then are able to sell them on, oh, look at what Miguel Almiron did, right? Came from South America playing for the Premier League, right? If you take that away by then passing them around the league, raising their valuation every time, and then being like, okay, I want to recap my investment, you're going to need $15 million to get this. Quite frankly, let's just say he's a bang average center back. I've never seen him play, but let's just say he's a bang average center back. That takes away the draw from your league, right? And
Yeah.
then you end up paying more money to get those players in to convince them to come and then stay here, and it'll throw a lot of things off. So they got to be really intelligent with it, which I agree. But you did mention that a lot of the rules that they have will kind of safeguard around that. So with the assumption that our listeners, for the most part, understand the roster rules to a general extent, one of the most griped about topics that we have in MLS as we enter the 30th year is this salary cap and how everybody thinks it's holding the league back. I want to kind of take your opinion on that. Where are we, and what could maybe be a proposed mechanism to maybe make it better and make us more competitive?
Yeah, I mean, I thought a lot about this after you asked me the question in the DM. And yes, I mean, naturally, by definition, a salary cap is capping your spending, it's capping your ambition, it's capping how good of a team that you can put on the field. Um, that said, would MLS be where it is right now without budget restrictions? Probably not. I mean, if you look back to when Don Garber took over in 99, 2000, you know, it was a bad 25-year run for American soccer. I mean, you had NASL fail, you had 10 years of really nothing being there. ASL tried to get something going around 1990, immediately lost 75% of their teams. MLS comes in, nearly goes out of business, down to 10 teams, down to 3 owners with AEG running 6 clubs, was in a situation where they needed to attract investors. They needed to get some stadiums and facilities built, and they needed to just lay the foundation of the league. And I think having that, cost, mechanisms in place, to be able to control against some of the runaway costs that we saw in NASL, a couple of decades before, and to really attract those types of investors was probably a good move. It helped. So at this point, we've got 30 separate investors. Over the last 10 years, we've seen $7 billion in investment in stadiums and training facilities. And really, at this point, the foundation's there. We've seen an explosion in valuations. Revenues have risen to the point where league average is now over 70 million. And so at this point, yeah, they're probably holding us back. We probably need to loosen some things beyond what we've seen last summer with the change to the 2-4-2-3-3, mechanisms that are in place and some of the stuff that we just talked about, changes that have been made that are really positive in terms of giving teams flexibility to build out rosters more the way they want to give them more freedom to be able to do that. But we're still looking at a situation where the base budget and allocation money is somewhere between 11 and 13 million. You still have some discretionary spend. You've got teams like Miami that are all the way up, spending in terms of transfer fees and wages in the 50 to $60 million range per year. So you can still spend a healthy amount. At the same time, Miami is estimated to have pulled in $200 million in revenue. To put that in perspective, that's akin to Ajax. That's about the revenue that Ajax brings in every year, and they're spending 3 times as much on those rates. So are you stifling ambition? 100%. So there needs to be some changes. And probably the easiest thing, I don't think we're going to see this until the end of this CBA after the 2027 season, but probably what we need is to go to a floor and cap perspective with some, exceptions for DPs and U22s, or just some general exceptions to be able to go out and spend on, certain, roster spots, whatever you want on the transfer side of things. That's probably the best way. And the reason that I say that is because MLS, another thing that's sort of happened over the last 5 years is accelerated, is we're seeing a tremendous disparity between what the bottom teams are taking in and what the top ones are. We're seeing it right now with Vancouver. They've been put up for sale, and I think this is a big reason. Forbes estimated their annual revenue is only 25 million. You look at the other side of the equation, as I mentioned, Inter Miami had 200 million, LAFC at 140 million, and yet really the rules are put in place to protect the Vancouvers, the Dallases, the Chicagos right now. Hopefully they'll improve, but those are sort of the bottom level teams when you're looking at the revenue side of the equation. And the rules are really set up to protect them while maintaining parity. But it is really, putting a limiter on what teams like Inter Miami, like LAFC, like the Galaxy, like Atlanta United can really put on the field. And for sure, it's holding the league back in some ways. And hopefully in the next CBA, we'll see some major movement towards allowing teams more flexibility and being able to spend while still keeping an eye on parity, because I do think that is, an exciting part of the league, that you don't have situations like you do in Europe where you've got some behemoth going up against the minnow bunkers for 90 minutes and you're just bored to tears. So,
Yeah, when they come out, I was like, oh man, like I'll take last year's. I'm like Sheffield United only lost 2-0 to Man City. What a game! Like, no, I don't want to walk out and be like, oh man, I'm so glad we didn't get beaten by 5. We only got beaten by 2. Like that's not really for me.
yeah, had 12% possession and pulled off one
Yeah.
shot on goal.
Well, I'm an Everton supporter as well. I've got little Jordan over there, I think.
Nice.
And I've stopped watching them because they literally get 20% of the ball. They sit in the entire game. They've got no idea what they're doing on the attack. Like it's not fun to watch anymore. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, like another crucial point in the like. I don't care for the point. Like great. I want to watch good soccer, at least expansive and exciting. And again, maybe that's just me, but it doesn't really fill me with joy. But I couldn't agree with you more. I think when they came in from where we started, absolutely needed it. It is the reason we're here today. But have we crawled forward too slowly? I would say yes. I think you've got so much potential there. I think there are more eyes on the league than ever. And I think that it was really disappointing. It was back in December of 23, I think, when everyone was like teasing this, oh, coming into 24, Messi's coming in, like it's gonna blow up. And they're like, not really, don't expect anything. Right. They basically came out and was like, yeah, we're not gonna do anything until, we're not gonna do anything drastic. And it just lets you down because you're like, this is the time we want to do it, and you've got all these eyes on the league, and I love the idea of the ceiling and the floor. I think at the very least, and maybe that then leads to a little bit of price inflation on some players, like, oh, I'm going to take this, you know, again, relatively mid guy. I'm going to toss him more money just to hit the ceiling, or the floor. But overall, I do think that that's a good way to encourage the correct investment, right?
Yeah,
We're not at a point anymore where we are trying to be protective for investment in stadiums or investments in academies or investment, that is kind of MLS 2.0, early 3.0 type of thing. We're now, in my opinion, entering MLS 4.0, where it's time to start ramping up a little bit. And I understand the hesitation because you've always got the NASL monster staring in the rearview mirror, right? Here I come. You're going to open those things up and everything's going to go down. But can we do it intelligently to increase this investment so that and again, you mentioned, I think you said it was around 11 to 13 million, right? In this market, in the football market today, 11 to 13 million is getting you two decent players, right? Maybe depending on where you're getting them from. So I like the idea that they came up with the different pathways to build your team and how you'd like to do it, but it does feel like if you just allowed them and we're going to get here to this next question in a second about the mechanisms, the GAMs, the TAMs, the U22s, the DPs, all this sort of stuff. It feels like if you were to just scrap it and get rid of it and give this freedom within a range of floor, ceiling, however you want to do it. You want to go buy five high level players from Barcelona's over 40 team and then fill it with a bunch of homegrowns, go right ahead. You want to go with a bunch of U22s that you can flip for profit in 2 years and move on from there, go right ahead. You want to be Philly and buy nobody and somehow get put on a FIFA banned registration list, go right ahead, right? Nobody's going to stop you. But instead of saying you can only do it this way or now this way or this way, allow it to be a little bit more free flowing. So I'll pass that question on to you. Is there a way that these MLS roster mechanisms can be improved or removed altogether so that people aren't showing up and using it as the excuse of like, oh, I just don't understand these roster mechanisms. I can't follow the league, right? Can we make those changes?
yeah. I mean, I think we're getting there slowly but surely. I think some of the transparency that's been added um, over the last year or so. Now we're seeing roster profiles being dropped. That's huge. We just saw the release of available GAM. That's a big deal. And I think there is a little bit of just MLS hater in some of those complaints because it's not like we don't have complex roster rules in the rest of our sports. I mean, I'm not a huge NBA fan. I follow the league pretty closely. I can't tell you what's going on. You need Matt Doyle to tell you what's going on in those rules because I can't do it. And the same thing that goes with the NFL. Extremely complex rules. So some of that I think is a little bit of a false narrative. But the biggest thing for me is, do teams have the flexibility to put a good team on the field? Do they? And if the rules allow you to go into Mexico City and knock off Club America or Cruz Azul or go into Monterrey and knock off Tigres or Monterrey, fine. If they allow you to compete with teams from Brazil, if you could feel like you're going into the Club World Cup and you're not walking into a complete buzzsaw where you're going to get embarrassed because teams just can't add. I mean, Inter Miami, I guarantee you, if they had a little bit more flexibility, would have been out in the market spending, 50 million in the transfer market, probably adding, 20 million in salary to go for it. But the rules just don't allow that. And I'm not saying we're going to necessarily get to the last part of that right away, even in the next CBA, but you just want rules in place that are going to allow MLS to do what they said they want to do, which is to progress in becoming one of the top leagues in the world. And the rules right now are just so restrictive in terms of how you can build, types of players that you can bring in, what their salary is, really where you can recruit certain positions. For example, MLS teams just can't go out and spend 5 million on a right back. Maybe as a U22, but for in general, you just can't do it. You got to focus your energy on the front of the pitch. Go for offensive players, and you fill in the back. And you can still build some good teams that way, but it's when you're going up against international competition, which is really, in my opinion, where MLS needs to begin to break through to prove that it's a top league in the world. You gotta loosen things up. You gotta loosen the rules. And yes, maintain parity. You don't want a situation where you got a team like Vancouver that just can't compete. Goes into a year, they're going to be bottom five in the league. That's just what it is. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You want a Philadelphia, even though I'd like them to spend more, you want a Philadelphia to be able to take a different approach, build through homegrowns, build through their academies, and still be successful and not be able to just be spent into the ground by other MLS teams, but got to give a little bit more flexibility. And I think if you do that, and people will be a lot less concerned with what acronyms MLS is using to describe roster mechanisms. They'll be a lot more concerned with what players are coming in and what the quality on the pitch is. So,
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And I think one of the things that our focus then needs to shift to, and it's tough because there's not, even with Leagues Cup coming in now, there's not a lot of opportunity to do this, but the conversation isn't MLS versus MLS anymore. It's got to be how are we able to set ourselves up to go into the Champions League, to go into the Club World Cup, to if the stars align and we get into Libertadores, how do we line up with those teams? It's not about, oh, how are we going to line up against Manchester City and Barcelona?
yeah,
No, right? It's always going to be about, okay, winner take all game down in Mexico. How are you lining up to win the Champions League that you have won once in 20 years?
yeah,
That is our next step, right? We've gotten ourselves our good following. We've gotten ourselves good homegrowns, good academies, good facility. We've got it all. Now it's how do we beat our guys to the south? How do we beat our friends down across the sea in South America, right? How do we take it to that level? And I would agree. It doesn't matter so much how the roster rules are or the mechanisms are, so long as you are able to compete at that level. I think you've put that really, really well. I like that. The other thing I do want to shift to is a idea of calendar and schedule and things of that nature. I mean, one of the things that came out in this list of changes that they made was a slight shift in the transfer windows. So one of the things that held Charlotte back last year from getting a couple deals across the line was the fact that the transfer window ended 2 weeks, I think, before the European one did. So a lot of the people they were targeting were like, I'm going to wait it out for 2 weeks and see if I can get something else across the line. Seems like they shifted it back about 7-ish days, which may give us a benefit there. I'm assuming, I believe we've had this conversation before off air, but I'm assuming you're in favor of that, if I remember correctly. It's a good move.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's a slight, very slight, un poquito improvements. What I really would have liked to see long term, and it's difficult because you've got other parties that are involved. The federation set what these windows are. You have a total of basically, across the two windows, 12 weeks that you can put it in. You can construct it however you want. Most people will do a 3-month primary, a 1-month secondary window, which happens to be the summer transfer window, which is their primary window throughout most of the rest of the world. So us only having a 1-month primary window has always been a huge limiter. We typically ended a couple of weeks before the European ones, so you end up in a situation like what happened to Charlotte, like what happened to Cincinnati, where they were being extremely aggressive in the transfer market to try to go out and get names and just didn't get things across the line before the window opened. Or you're having teams that are leveraging that, overpricing players. So kind of in a catch-22. And at the same time, you're losing players during that primary market without enough time to replace them. So ideally, what I would love to see long term is just for us to go with a 2-month primary and 2-month secondary. So the full 2 month, summer transfer window to move beyond the European one. But that has to be approved by the USSF. It has to be, because we have Canadian teams, it also has to be approved by Canadian soccer. And they were not lined up last year. They actually had a different, secondary transfer or summer transfer window than the American MLS teams, which was weird AF. And then you also have NWSL and their needs and how they want to construct their thing. So you've got to line up all these parties. But it's good that I think that MLS teams are acknowledging that there's an issue that they need to address, they need to improve upon if they're going to be a part of the global transfer market. So in that way, I think it's a positive step, but it's a very, very small step. And I think hopefully over time, they move towards a more permanent solution. And maybe that's just shifting the calendar altogether. I don't know.
Yeah, that one's up in the air. That's not coming until at least 27. So we have a little bit of time for that, it sounds like. But we'll have to get you back on when they eventually make a decision. We'll chat about that again. But another big gripe in this conversation is the supporter shield and the overall table and the schedule in that sense. You know, some may say, Red Bull fans particularly, that the supporter shield actually is the most important trophy in MLS, at least up until 2018. But maybe it no longer is because the balanced schedule doesn't exist, right? You're not everybody's playing the same team, so you can't really go off of total points because maybe you're in the West and you're playing San Jose, who can see goals for fun, and you're playing them 2 to 3 times a year, while Red Bull go up against Columbus 3 times a year. I don't know, something like that, right? Don Garber's noted that MLS expansion likely won't go past 32 teams, but is there a league realignment you might think at 30 or 32 teams that could benefit in terms of the balanced schedule or in terms of just keeping general fans interested in the total table and the run into the playoffs?
Yeah, just to peel something off. I mean, I'm in favor of having a 30 to 32 team league. I know some people want to go, we only need to have 20 teams, and then we should go with some sort of a weird revenue sharing system where we have an MLS one and two. And I'm just not in favor of that. We have a big country, a lot of metro areas. I want to have first division soccer in as many places as we can because I think that's going to improve the overall game in America. But that said, you get to 32, you go with eight or four 8-team divisions, play each team in your division twice, and then you play everybody else once. That's what I'd like to see. Then at least you're getting where you're having to play everybody once. It's not a balanced schedule. It's not where you're playing everybody home and away, but at least you're not missing Miami when they win the Supporters Shield, or you're not missing, the most dangerous team in the Western Conference when you're in the East. And to me, I kind of think they're probably going to go to 32. There's still some too much buzz around, there's a lot of talk about Indianapolis. There's been talk about Vegas, maybe a little bit about Phoenix, so I think they're probably going to, add two more markets. Hopefully they pause a little bit because I'd still like to see USL be able to stabilize a little bit, get themselves on a solid footing as well. But yeah, I mean, that would be my long-term solution once they go to 32. I think that those division setups have worked pretty well in other American sports, and that would be kind of my thought on it.
Yeah, even if you did, 16 and 16, you play everybody in your division or in your conference home and away. I think I like divisions too. I think divisions are very comfortable to American fans, right? They get it from NFL, they get it from NHL now. Like they understand how that works, and I don't think it would put anybody off. But even if you just did 16 and 16 in conferences and you went home and away at each, everybody plays 30 games, and then you lead into the playoffs. That is almost your League's Cup break right there. Those 4-ish, 5-ish games that you're missing out, that could be your League's Cup break, right? So now you're not necessarily putting the season off. Now I also enjoy the fact that we're not taking off for League's Cup anymore. That's a completely separate conversation. But if that's something that you're looking to do to release schedule congestion and keep everything involved, U.S. Open Cup as well, another completely separate conversation. But that could be another way to take that away as well. And I think that at some point the conferences are either going to have to split completely or, like you mentioned, go into a division setup and then do everybody in your division and then everybody else. I would prefer it almost your way where you've got everybody playing each other because then the supporter shield is nice. And it actually has more impact on the Champions League than the playoffs do, which I only recognize now as Red Bull lost in the MLS Cup final and didn't make the Champions League, which is heartbreaking. But they do it on the supporter shield standing, so that could be a better way to go about that as well. Uh, Man, that's heartbreaking. I can't believe I had to relive that. Anyways, there are. We only got a couple more here, so I won't waffle on too long, but because I could talk all day about how Red Bull break my heart, but I won't. There are a lot of, and I use this term complaint loosely because it's just, the anti-MLS echo chamber, right, on Twitter and elsewhere. But there are a lot of complaints that lend towards the idea that MLS is only in it for the money. They don't really care about the general fan experience. And I think that that's a very broad, overreaching statement where you can pick it apart and say, okay, in this area you're wrong, but in this area you're right. But I'd love to hear your thoughts and if there's a balance between the two and how that may or may not hurt the league in terms of its general growth and maybe how we can fix that.
Yeah, they didn't help themselves with that complaint this year, did they? Um,
No, no,
I
no.
think the US Open Cup decision was extremely obtuse, not for that at all. I think certain other areas that they go into, just some of their, even down to their pricing when it comes to, their jerseys and stuff like that, is maybe more American capitalistic than we'd like to see. And it kind of feeds into that narrative. That said, I do think there are some good owners in this league that really want to push the game forward. Not all of them, certainly not. There's certainly some owners I'd like to see just sell and walk away. And I think they probably still have too much sway within the league. But, even when you look at how MLS has gone about building these stadiums, for the most part, they paid for them themselves. They made these stadiums very fan-centric, huge supporter sections, freestanding supporter sections now. They built some great atmospheres. Yeah, do they overprice messy games and stuff like that, which ticks people off for sure. But I got to give them some credit. I just think it's a mixed bag when you're looking at greedy owners, and I think it sort of feeds into all the pro rel discussion that constantly buzzes around American soccer, and the fact that they're cheap owners that are just looking to do this to make money. They're not in it for any kind of a sporting atmosphere. And yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that all the way across the board, but they've made some head scratching decisions too, where it's just like, man, you guys got to get out of your own echo chamber. I know you're doing all these fan surveys, but maybe just go into the stands and talk to fans. If you're talking about doing something like that where you're pulling teams out of Open Cup, just go into the stands, go into St. Louis's stands, because a lot of them didn't show up for those games, and that put a huge dent in what you were trying to do for Leagues Cup. So I think maybe they just need to kind of get out of their own echo chamber, talk to fans a little bit more, connect with them a little bit more directly. Sometimes that's really hard for corporations to do, but I think there's some truth to it. I also think there's some areas where MLS has been a good partner for trying to grow the game. I mean, 25 years ago, if you would have told me that every team had an academy, basically every team was operating out of a 40, 50, $150 million training facility, and they had a fully funded reserve league that was professional in nature, I would have been like, that sounds pretty good to me. So they made steps, but I do think they need to do a better job of not just connecting with their fans, but trying to connect with fans of USL teams, trying to connect with fans of Liga MX, trying to just make it about the sporting side of things. And that's where kind of go back to what I was talking about before with like, just make sure your teams have an ability to compete. You don't have to win every competition with Liga MX. You don't have to go down to Copa Libertadores and win, but you can't get embarrassed.
Right.
You can't have the gap be so big that everybody just realizes, hey, you're not really setting this thing up to be the best league. So that's really where I think that area, you can make money. You can have your valuations go up to $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion, but you also got to win. And I think that's what, you kind of talked about it. American fans, A, we want to win, and B, we want to see, people that are aggressive and they're trying to win. You see that in the other sports, you see it in our Olympic sports. It's about winning. And yet we're as you mentioned, we're stable now. If we win internationally, a lot of this MLS hater stuff will go by the wayside. But at this point, you've done all the legwork. Next couple of years coming out of the World Cup, it's a huge opportunity. Are you going to loosen the strings? That's going to be the question. And if you don't, then all the criticism about they're just in it for the money. They're just in it for the franchise value. Um, you know, putting more money in their pocket, I think rings pretty true, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
That's as somebody that's followed this for, 30 years and, really hopes that the league grows because I love the sport.
Yeah.
But I think you got to look at it. You got to be honest with yourself too, and the decision makers in the league. You got to hold them accountable. That's the only way we're going to see change. I mean, perfect example is what happened in Columbus a few years ago, and then what happened in LA. They held their teams to a standard. They fought for them, and it resulted in probably the two of the most entertaining, successful teams we've seen in recent years. So I think it's totally fair for MLS fans to go to their teams and hold them accountable. And one of the changes that we saw was now that MLS Next Pro players are going to have the ability to play more first team, especially in cup competitions, which hopefully will lead to, a full return of all MLS teams to the US Open Cup. And that's about fans in St. Louis. That's about fans in LA. That's about fans in New York, all across the league saying, no, man, we're not good with this. And we want you to care about the actual sporting side, the history of the game. Leagues Cup's great. I like Leagues Cup, but we got to connect with the fans on a level. And soccer,
100%.
by and large, they're people that believe in the supporting the actual sporting side of the game. And they're not just fans of MLS. I don't know any MLS fan that's just a fan of MLS. They are, we can see, soccer throughout the globe. And see every league, basically every top league in the world, every single weekend, every single midday. We can watch Champions League. This is in my opinion, for all the shtick Americans get about calling it soccer, I think for the most part, if you're looking at actual soccer fans, we're extremely well informed, and you're not going to fool anybody with gimmicks and tricks. So just win, man. Just win. Just put a good product out on the pitch. Try to put the best product out on the pitch you can. Don't drive yourself into bankruptcy, but try to put the best product on the pitch if you can. And I think that solves a lot of these anti-MLS issues. And right now, are they doing that? Probably not. Probably
Right.
not. They could probably do more, given how much money some of these teams are driving.
Yeah. Well, and I think it kind of ties back to the idea of what we're talking about with the salary cap, right? Early on, or the roster rules, right? Early on, you needed to focus on keeping things tight, making money, and doing all this stuff. But like we've talked about, we are stable now. We have all of that stuff, and you are turning profits, relative profits in terms of your overall profile year over year, and you're worth like multiple billions of dollars. Like, let's be real here. Like, you aren't just like pulling change out of your pocket. Like, this is all I have for you. Like, we know how much money you have. So now it's how can you change the mindset? And it's way easier said than done, especially with people who are billionaires, because you don't become billionaires by accident. You do things intentionally.
Well,
Um,
just to put it in perspective a little bit,
uh
this is Forbes. This is estimates. We don't know this to be true. It's not necessarily market tested, but they estimate the total franchise valuations of MLS to be $20 billion. 20 billion. The overall spend on the first teams this year, less than 800 million. I mean, it's hard to go to a fan when they're seeing Forbes say, you know, Inter Miami could be worth $2 billion next year, and they're spending $60 million in the first team.
right.
And they're being as aggressive as they possibly can be.
Right, and at no fault of their own, they'd love to go
Yeah.
out and spend that, right? But yeah, and then it's how do you balance that out? And we say all the time, and you kind of I tried not to rope this in because it can go on forever, but this whole U.S. Open Cup versus Leagues Cup thing, you're right. Fan experience is not always where is the most money spent, right? I completely agree that we say it all the time. Connor would say it right now is we like Leagues Cup. It's different. It's fun. It's unique. It's got a lot that it can be improved upon, right? We can go and split US versus Mexico and play in different stadiums. We can do a whole bunch of stuff. And again, there's a whole reason why we don't do that, and we get it. But there's no reason not to play or not to give teams the decision to play in the Open Cup, right? And by that we mean if you want to take your youth players and just run a youth team out there, go right ahead, right? But MLS held themselves back because they had it in their CBA where it's like you only had four call-ups or whatever. And that right there, now you're taking out because a lot of those teams will play in different stadiums and won't play in the main stadium, right? So Red Bull, for example, go out to Montclair and play, where they would play in Harrison for their home games, Montclair for their other games. Like that's a whole market that may not be able to make it out to Harrison every game, who's now like, okay, I can come watch you guys play at Montclair. Oh, well, now you're only going to play the second team. I can watch the second team play every week. And I don't because it's a second team. There's no reason to do that. But even if it's a second team branded as the first team, it's just a different market you can reach. And it's just there's definitely a balance in there. And I would believe, and I think I would speak for Connor as well, that it's time to shift that focus from how much money can we make without saying, okay, let's go burn it all now, right? But how much money can we make and transition into how can we take that money and turn it into fan retention, fan attraction, and then grow us, not just my pockets or what have you, because that in the long term is going what I believe is going to be the make or break, right? You don't get to be a top five, top 10 league if your stadiums are packed out at 65% every week because and I use that as a Red Bull example because I will show up to Red Bull. It was better this year, but in years past it was 65% and 90% of the 65% were wearing Man U, Juventus, Barcelona kits. They were just there because it was something to do on a Saturday night, right? How can you change that to be we want you to be Red Bull supporters, not soccer fans who are watching a Red Bull game. And that I think is one of the big steps that we need to make as a league to take us from where we are now into that next step. And I'll transition into our last question here because it's kind of the overarching question that is always in this conversation that is MLS is a top 10 league, it's a top 5 league, it's a bottom 30 league. Like this whole conversation of where do we rank amongst other leagues. I would just like to kind of throw it out there to you and say, where are we? And if we're not top 10, how can we get there?
Unfortunately, I don't think we are. I think we're close. I think we're on the margins, but I don't think we are. So I think obviously you take the top five out. I think we're definitely behind them. I'd say we're certainly behind, no question, we're behind the Portuguese league. I think no question we're behind Eredivisie. I would put us behind the Jupiler League. I'd put us behind Liga MX. I'd put us behind Super League. I'd put us behind the Championship. I'd definitely put us behind the Brasileiro. Basically, I'd put us basically in 13th. But it's close, man. Once you get beyond those top five, there's other than, in my opinion, probably championship. There's a lot of depth in the championship. Not as top heavy as what you'll see in like Portugal, Holland, those types of places. But really good mid-level depth. I think the same thing with Serie A. Oh, you have some great teams at the top of Serie A, but that's a deep league. Other than those two leagues in the top five, I think you can make a really convincing argument, and one that I personally believe that from the middle down, MLS is better than basically all those leagues. Where we suffer is exactly what we're talking about. Those top teams can't separate themselves. They can't spend more. They're tethered in spending to the bottom teams. So how do we get better? We got to allow those teams to fly a little bit, right? You got to allow those teams to be able to spend a little bit more. Could Inter Miami raise to the level of Palmeiras? Can they attract the players? Can they spend the money? Yeah, they can. Probably very quickly. In soccer, you can turn over a roster much quicker than you can in other sports. And some of those roster rules are going to allow you to do it. But can an LA Galaxy, can an LAFC, can an Atlanta United, reach the level of, in 3 or 4 years of some of these top, European teams? Maybe not the best team. Going to take some time to probably catch what Benfica and Porto are doing. Probably take some time to catch, some of the best teams in the Eredivisie, even though those are younger teams and, some of they're heavily reliant on being able to sell players, unlike a lot of the MLS teams. But so I guess long answer to a short question is not yet, but I mean, if you give some flexibility, I think MLS could pretty quickly, probably within 4 to 6 windows, match what they're doing in Portugal. I
Yeah.
just do. Maybe not. You're probably still going to have some separation between the top of MLS because I do think you want to maintain some parity and Benfica, and Porto, Sporting, but better than all the rest, yeah. And much deeper and a much more competitive league, yeah. And maybe a more fun to watch league because of that competitiveness, yeah. So I think you can get to that sixth spot in a hurry, and then you start to reel in League One, and you just, as MLS is kind of done. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, if you ask me, I'd probably say we're 25th-ish. So the rise where we have is not nothing, but we're not going to get beyond where we are right now. As we talked when we first started with a budget and allocation of 11 to 13 million for each team. You
Uh,
just, you're not going to get there with that. You've got to give teams that want to excel more flexibility to do so. And is that going to happen in the next CBA? I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
everything about watching MLS and their salary roster rules says that it'll probably be a half solution.
Mhm.
And we'll continue to move up slowly, and maybe we get to the 10 spot and they're happy with that. But I really feel like, as you were kind of talking about, now is the time to sort of put your foot on the gas a little bit, or at least allow teams to be more aggressive within limits, right?
Yeah.
Within some limits. But if you look at the overall spending in the non-top five leagues, it's not a huge gap. It's just not a huge gap. And in many cases, and I know capology and salary sport and stuff like that are extremely flawed. A lot of times you look at it and you're like, that's just not right. But if you look at that, if you're looking at the middle, MLS is already really outspending them. And now that you're looking at, you know, I mean, LAFC does the same revenue basically as Benfica. Miami does the same revenue as Ajax. Those are two of the best non-top five teams in Europe. Why the hell can't we then raise the level of our league beyond their leagues? It's just all about ambition. And it's about kind of moving some of those. One of the questions you were asking me is, about cheap owners holding us back. And yeah, man, when you got when you got Greg Kerfoot and Clark Hunt running the competition committee, yeah, cheap owners are holding us back. Cheap owners are holding us back.
Oh
But
yeah.
you got to move those guys out of decision making. You've got to allow, you know, owners like Jorge Mas to more flexibility to turn this league into what it really can be. So
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think we are on the outside. I think it's weird because the top 10 moniker again is it branches over a lot of things. Are we top 10 in spending? Are we top 10 in on quality play? Are we top 10 in whatever? And I think it can be put on like a bunch of different hats. And one of the things that I think, I think you're always going to have, like we've talked about, this group that's like, oh, it's never going to be a top 10, and it's because that they don't rate our Champions League, like the European Champions League. Oh, it's top 10 because they've got Pro Rel over there, so the bottom's always intense. And they're not just playing for the title, but they're also playing for this big Champions League that's the biggest competition in the world outside the World Cup. Like it means so much more. So I think on the outside of what we can do, somebody's got to fix Champions League here, like, or Champions Cup, right? So, but now again, a completely other story. Which again, we could sit here for 4 hours and talk about every single thing wrong, but I don't think anybody would listen to that for 4 hours. But outside of that, I think the other big thing that will hold us back is from a general viewpoint of like, oh, how's this league doing? If somebody turns in and sees every stadium like Atlanta packed to the brim, or Seattle or LAFC packed out, singing, chanting, whatever, every single team like that, it will elevate them as like, oh, this is serious in that country. Right. But if you turn into, and I'll use Red Bull again as the example, a Red Bull where it's, you can you can count the number of people more than you can count the number of empty seats. That's where you're going to start dragging your feet a little bit. Like I said, I've been to Cincinnati, I've been to Orlando now, and I've been to Charlotte. Charlotte being a football stadium was the only one I was in that wasn't packed, and it was mid-August. So the top bowl was open and you had different seats there, but the supporters groups are growing really well. It's just how do you get the casual to be a every week in and out sort of thing. And I think if we could fix those two things, Champions League and just general fan, attendance and caring about their club, I think it helps us jump into there. And then you move on to the roster rules that we've talked all the way about. But I think those are two really big things that we would need to really hone in on because no matter what we do with our roster rules, if we're still going out and buying these, like Atlanta's looking at Bamba and Lede La and all these sorts of like really good in prime players, but if nobody knows about them and they're just like, whatever, and they don't want to come because, again, going back to conversations that we just had, right? The team isn't caring about the on the field, or they're not caring about the connection to the club or the fans, and they're only worried about their money and winning, and it doesn't turn things over. I think that would hold us back from the casual, and I use the term lightly these days, but the casual Euro snob in America who's like, oh man, look at Man United's 80,000 a game. You guys only get 15. You're nowhere near a top 10, right? Like it's who are you asking the question of the top 10 to? I think determines where you need to make changes to get them into the top 10, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think what you're talking about, especially what you're talking about with Red Bull, it comes down to owners too, right? MLS is was over, attendance was up 5%. It was over 23,000 on the top 10 solidly, top eight in attendance. There's a lot of good markets like I watch St. Louis games, I watch games in LA, I watch games in a lot of markets, especially new stadiums, Columbus, Nashville, great games in Nashville from an energy
Mhm.
perspective. So I think there's a lot of good, but the places where it's off are in places where the ownership is just not dedicated, right?
Right.
You
Oh yeah.
know, unfortunately in New York, I think most Red Bull fans probably understand quite well at where in the pecking order Red Bull New York sits in comparison to, Leipzig, Salzburg, and even Bragantino now seems to be ahead of them in the pecking order. And if you're trying to build a fan base in New York, that's not going to fly. You're going to have to go out there and go beyond just adding an Emil Forsberg from another one of your teams and saying, "Hey, we're dedicated." And you hope they still lean into the academy side of things, and they just spent a ton of money on that academy facility. It looks amazing. But some of these leagues, and then you look at what's going on with Stan Kroenke in Colorado, that's not acceptable. How are you going to build a fan base anywhere? I don't care where it is. If you're not dedicating to putting the best product on the pitch, if you're not reinvesting in your facilities, if you're not, investing in the first team, if you're not investing in the academy, you need to do it all. You don't have to spend, you know, as much as some teams do. You don't have to be going out there and spending 780 million on a new stadium, but you can't be just clearly in a situation where it's painfully obvious that this team is not the most important thing. Winning is not the most important thing. And not every team is going to operate at the, top level of spending. But the teams that struggle with the energy, with the attendance, are pretty much all teams where the owner kind of sucks.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
100%. Like, I want to make it, because I'm assuming a couple of my Red Bull fan friends are listening. Attendance has increased very, very much over the last couple of years. Like, I'm not saying we're down in the dumps or anything, but I watched back a game with 2013. It was like just a regular season game. Thierry Henry was there. That was back when they had that big surge of big name DPs. There wasn't an open seat in the house, and it was packed and it was bumping. And 10 years on now, and it's like it's different, right? And that can be attested to the fact that we didn't spend money on anybody for 5 years, right, from 2019 to about last year. And when we did, we brought in Emil Forsberg from one of our teams. Now we've got Eric Choupo-Moting, who we'll see how he works out in terms of pulling, but that's not the Thierry Henry that these people were used to, right? So they set off by bar high and then they changed paths and like, okay, well, I don't want to watch this anymore. It's there are a whole bunch of different things that go into it, but yeah, I definitely think fan
I will
attention is big.
I don't even in a market like New York, I don't think it's necessarily you got to go out there and sign Thierry Henry or
Mhm.
some modern level of player like that, Neymar, whatever it might be. I think Atlanta United really kind of showed that, right? They went out and at the time they started breaking transfer records. They went out and got Joseph Martinez. I guarantee you, Atlanta fans didn't know who he was, but when they looked into it, excited about it, they're like, "Oh, yeah, I can get down with this." You look at Miguel Almiron again, setting records. I mean, if I was Cincinnati, I'd be really excited about Kevin Dinke.
Oh yeah.
And most of them probably didn't know who he was. But all you got to do is put on a highlight tape of his and get excited about him. And those are some of the kind of signings that I think I'd like to see for Red Bull. Is like you're talking about. You know, there's so many times over the years that Red Bull has been third, fourth, fifth place, and he's kind of challenging. You look at him and you're like, game model's working. They got a ton of great young pieces. They've got some veteran pieces that are firing. They're one or two guys short. And how many summer transfer windows did you go through where it's just like came and went?
Yeah.
Um, and that's where that ownership piece comes in to say, we're going to do what it takes in this window to push us over the edge to try to win. May fail, but now we can do it. And that's where some of the other rules come into place now because they had some cover when they went out and signed Dante Van Zier and it didn't really work out. Well, we can't move him. We're not going to buy him out for $15 million or whatever it is. Probably not even that much with Van Zier, but so we're just going to have to live with him. So that's going to put a ceiling on what we can do. Well, now you got two buyouts every year. Now you can loan a player out and open a DP spot. So things like that are going to allow those teams, and I think they're really going to provide less cover for owners who aren't aggressive in doing that, who are sitting in those spots. I mean, you brought up Charlotte. I mean, it didn't work for them last year. They were sitting in the kind of that, playoff home field conversation, getting into those top four spots, and they went out. They were aggressive. They missed on a lot of guys. Didn't bring in the quality they probably wanted, but at least they were aggressive. And that's where I think you just, as fans, as me as a fan of the league and as you as a fan of Red Bulls, I think that's really all you can really ask for is that ownership provides, your front office with the ability to go out and the resource to be able to go out and, fill in the gaps when they're there and when you have an opportunity to win.
Yeah. And one last point on Red Bull because I will talk for hours if I have to. Their style of play is not attractive in the slightest, and well, it's gotten better, but over those 5 year period where they were transitioning from the big names to the academy kids and transitioning into energy drink high press soccer, it was abysmal. I mean, it was just a terrible, terrible watch. So that also leads to it. But like I said, we can talk about how bad Red Bull are all day, but we did make an MLS Cup, so I can at least say
Yeah.
I've seen
I
one.
mean, I didn't enjoy the soccer in the playoffs from you guys, but I will say this 2018 was some of the best soccer that's been played in MLS
Oh
by them.
yeah, oh yeah,
So if you have a Bradley Wright Phillips up front or somebody of that caliber, if you have a Sasha Question, if you have a Tyler Adams in that system, it can look pretty good. The problem, I guess, for you all has just been when you've moved those guys on, which is fine. MLS is going to be a selling league. Every league is a selling league, basically. I mean, you're seeing it in the EPL where they've got sell players.
Mhm.
There's no league that's not a selling league. But you just want them to bring in those replacement pieces to have the resources available to do it. And they've certainly moved off. They were one of the biggest movers in salary this year in terms of increases. They had been near the bottom for years. So you hope that continues and you hope they hit with some of this stuff and maybe they're able to move off Van Zier and bring in that extra piece because I think they're close. I think they're close. And that's what you want as you're a fan of one of these teams is just that teams are going to aggressively go out and move. I mean, Austin's a good example. I don't know if it's going to work, but they spent 30 million over the last two windows.
Yeah, they're
Actually,
trying.
more than that. Probably up about 35 million in the last two windows. And at least as a fan, I can live with losing if my team is really good. Maybe not as a Chicago fan, they need to win. But if you're a team that consistently your ownership goes for it and gives your front office is aggressive, then I think you can live with that. What this just goes back to everything else. You want these teams to be going out there and trying to put the absolute best product on the pitch that the rules allow. And
Yep.
you want more and more of these owners to be pushing MLS to loosen the rules. And hopefully we're starting to see a little bit of that. Some of the changes, expansion of the competition committee. Yeah, the true test is probably going to be over these next couple of years as to whether or not MLS is actually going to reach those heights anytime soon. So it'll be
We
fun to
we
watch.
we can only wait and see and kind of keep our fingers crossed because I think there's a lot of potential there, but it's out of our hands. We can only urge them on. But Mike, I want to thank you so much for jumping on here and having this conversation with us. I think it was really, really informative and for will inform our listeners about where exactly their thoughts should be in terms of things like this, or challenge their thoughts of where they might be. So make sure you guys leave comments and let us know what you think of all the ideas that we've shared here today. And before we log off, Mike, I want to give you a little bit of time to tell everybody who's listening where they can find you.
Yeah, just on Blue Sky. I'm no longer on the other site, so you can find me on Blue Sky at MLS Box2Box. And yeah, just come and check it out. I'm always skiing for better or worse.
Yeah. The if they gave Blue Sky scheduling ability and pop-up alerts, I can turn it on for Tommy Scoops, and
There you go.
I could schedule our posts. I would never touch the other one again.
I tell you
But
what, if I could figure out how to make a feed, and I will someday when I have time, I
yeah,
think that'll solve a lot of issues. But yeah, I love Blue Sky. Hopefully you guys come over there. Hopefully all the MLS teams actually get over there.
yes, that's the other thing too. Yeah, there's not as
Yeah,
many over there.
yeah.
Man, but yeah, and if you're new here, you haven't been around before, we are, I say we, and my other co-host who is not here today, we jump on here 2 times a week and we do past, present, and future MLS. So we do predictions, we do current event reactions, and we do MLS history stuff. So if you are into any of that sort of stuff, please jump on and give us a follow. We're on YouTube, Blue Sky, and we were on TikTok, but that seems to be no longer a thing, at least for the short term. And we will still be on Twitter for a little bit until we can get some of those other things transferred over. But give us a follow wherever you're at, and you want to interact with us because we would love to interact with you. But thank you guys so much for listening, Mike. Thank you again for joining us. We really, really enjoyed this. We hope you all enjoyed it, and we will see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. See ya.